welcome back to episode 17. For this one, we'll be paying a visit to Hollywood Park Casino, mixing it up in Yellow Chip Poker Bliss. We had intentions to jump into the 5-10-20 game, but seeing how that is just an interest list at the moment, we settled down at one of the 3 tables of 5-5 while we wait. We buy in for the table max of 500, and shortly after sitting down, we run into a string of awesome cards and get right into the mix of things. In this first hand, the straddle is on and we find pocket 4s in late position. 2 middle position players limp in and I follow suit by overlimping on the button. The big blind calls and the straddle checks his option. The flop comes a connected queen high, and when the straddle leads out here for 40, the low jack min raises to 80, which makes our decision to fold here a trivial one. On the very next hand, we're in the cutoff and look down at queen jack of clubs. There seems to be a theme of limping in at the table, and at this point, I've gotten my bearings and decide to shake things up a little. 2 players limp in before action gets to us, and we raise to 30 to thin the field. The action folds back to both limpers who end up making the call. We're 3 ways to a flop of 9-7 deuce with 2 clubs. We flop really good equity here with a queen high flush draw, along with a backdoor straight opportunity. When action checks to us, we happily continue here for 60, but unfortunately end up getting both opponents to fold. Moving on, things keep getting better for us in this next hand as we look down at pocket aces. When action folds to us, we open to 30 again, and 2 unfortunate things happen. First, everyone folds, so we don't get any action with our aces. And second, we have a camera malfunction, so we weren't able to capture video for the next 2 hands that happened back to back. At this point, it would appear that I'm getting after it at this table. After all, I've only sat down for the last hot second, and I have already played the last 4 out of 5 hands dealt. This trend isn't about to change as I look down at the very same pocket aces once again in mid-position. First to act limps in, followed by the person to my right who makes it 25 to go. We're going to be capitalizing on the aggression that we've shown at this table already and raises to 110. Action folds to the small blind, who appears to be getting tired of my antics and re-raises to 400. This opponent started the hand with roughly 470 total, so when action folds back to me, we shove all in to commit the remainder of his chips. Not surprisingly, the player calls pretty quickly. We see all 5 cards, which runs out 7 high, and our aces hold. I had mentioned earlier that hands 4 and 5 happen back to back, but after reviewing my notes a little closer, it looks like hand 4 happened immediately after, and hand 5 happens soon after the button passes us. There's a live straddle to 10, along with 3 players who limp in before action gets to us in late position. We look down to find pocket kings, and raises to 80 considering all the dead money in the pot. The straddler says that this looks like a squeeze, and one of the other opponents at this point asks us to show ace-king as everyone folds. I end up nodding while flashing a black king before mucking my hand. For this next one, a mid-position player opens to 20, and both the cutoff and button make the call. We look down at ace-10 of diamonds in the big blind, and normally this is a slam dunk squeeze, but there were some really interesting table dynamics going on at the moment, so we elect to call here instead, and we're off to see the flop 4 ways. When the flop of ace-10-7 rainbow hits the board, we smash this flop with top 2 pair. Now, one could argue that this should be in one's leading range of hands, though I think that's up for debate. Anyhow, I like to play in flow by checking it over to the others, and action checks around. The turn brings a queen, and this time, action checks around to the button who bets out for 55. The queen does complete a few draws like king-jack, but that's about it. In the grand scheme of things, I'm not really too concerned with the button having king-jack here, as he's going to have plenty of other hands in this particular spot. I decide to make a call here and re-evaluate the river. When the middle position player calls as well, I think we have several cards to potentially dodge here. The river brings in offsuit 5, and all relevant draws here are bricked. The standard play is probably to lead here, and hope to get called by one of our opponents. That said, I decide to bluff catch here instead against these two opponents. The mid-position player was relatively short, and the button clearly has shown that they have the chops to get creative at times. The mid-position player checks, and now the button bets out here for a chunky 175. There's a few things to think about here. First, I still have the mid-position player behind me to act, though he's only playing 280, so that's not too much of a concern. Then, there's the question of what kind of hand the button is really betting here with for this sizing. As I mentioned, I'm not too worried about King-Jack here, so that leaves sets, other two-pair combinations, and busted draws. In the end, I decide to make the call, and the mid-position player folds. The button shows 9-5 of hearts for a pair of 5s. We weren't expecting to see that hand specifically, but we'll take it. At this point, we've been at the table for roughly 30 minutes, and have gone on a small heater. It would be pretty cool if these vlogs could all be of massive all-in pots, but a lot of the interaction at the table comprised of small ball poker. We're now in the straddle, playing 5-handed, as we have a bunch of people who've stepped away. The action folds around to the blinds, who complete for 10, and when we look down at Ace-4 offsuit, this is good enough here to put in a value raise to 45. We're way in front of the hands that our opponents would limp in here with, and it certainly helps having a winning image. The small blind instantly folds, and the big blind thinks about it a little bit before also deciding to let it go. Moving on, we're now in the small blind with 10-8 of diamonds. The straddle is on, and first act limps in for 10, and action folds all the way to me in the small blind. I complete for 5, and so does the big blind. Now, I'm not here to run a clinic on how to straddle, but this particular player wasn't doing himself any favors the way he's been playing them so far. The straddle checks his option, and we're 4 ways to a flop of 10-8-5 with 2 hearts. We flopped top 2 on a relatively wet board. I lead out here for 25, and get 2 quick calls. The turn is the ace of clubs, and this is a pretty good card to continue betting on, as one of our 2 opponents might have called the flop with the ace high flush draw, which this card would definitely connect with. We pick a size of 75, targeting that elusive ace, but surprisingly, both opponents end up folding. Sometimes you have to make some exploitative folds even though you don't really want to. In this next hand, we have 2 black 6s and open to 30 in mid position. The cutoff, who hasn't played a hand in the last hour, calls, and the button, small blind, and big blind follow suit. We're 5 ways to a monotone 4 high flop. Action checks around to the cutoff, who bets out for 75. It folds all the way back to me, and while I usually will call here to evaluate the turn, I don't think this is a great spot for that we're out of position against this particular opponent. So for those reasons, we cut this one loose and move on. We're racking up to move to a new table and are forced to buy in for the maximum of 500 due to LA casino rules. I had totally forgotten about this rule and ended up kicking myself because by the time I realized this at the new table, the floor had already filled my old seat. Oh well, let's see how we do at this new table. Not long after getting situated at this new table, we look down at Ace-King and make it 25 first to act. Action folds to the hijack, who's one of the regulars at the casino, and he makes the call for 25. We're heads up to a flop of King 10-8 with 2 hearts. Against this particular opponent, I elect to check call above 30 on this board. The offsuit 6 on the turn does complete some straight draws. I check it over again and the opponent bets 45. While we have a medium strength hand here, we take this opportunity to raise this hand to 175. We don't block many of the cards that we want our opponents to have in this spot, like the Ace of Hearts. After some deliberation by our opponent, they find a call and we're off to see the last card. We get a really clean river card, the 3 of Spades. This hand plays itself at this point as we jam here for our last 200. The opponent has a quick think about it, but eventually finds a fold here. Had we started to hand deeper, this hand may have served well as a check instead, so to allow the opponent to find a bluff at some frequency. For this next hand, we look down at 9-8 of spades in the cutoff, and raise to 30 once a mid-position player limps in. We get a cold call from the small blind, and the limper comes along as well. We're 3 ways to a flop of 7-7 deuce, and when the action checks over to us, we continue here for 50, and both opponents fold. For the last hand of the night, we're in the small blind and pick up no other than pocket aces one last time. A mid-position player opens to 20, followed by one caller in late position. I raise to 120 here, and just the late position player calls. It's obvious that the late position player has a pocket pair here, so we're hoping for a low flop to get stacks in here by the turn. The flop comes out Jack 5-4 rainbow, and when we continue here for 110, our opponent snap calls. The turn comes a king, and this card is bittersweet. I don't think our opponent ever has pocket kings here, though it's going to definitely be a scare card for them. We started this hand out with a plan, and there's little reason to deviate here, so we jam for 500. The opponent tanks for a good minute and proceeds to fold pocket tens. We don't get stacks in here, but sometimes things are left out of your immediate control. So let's talk results. Today, we were in for 500 and out for 1843 over a period of roughly 4 hours. In the pipeline, we have a 5-5 commerce session I think we'll be covering next, as well as a 5-10-20 session at Hollywood Park, where we find ourselves in the middle of a 5K pot, so stay tuned for that. Lastly, I encourage you to like and subscribe to this channel if you think I've earned it. It's always appreciated and it will help this community grow. Thanks again for joining me on another poker vlog. Take care of yourselves, stay safe, and see you next time.